Guess who's back? That's right. So, a number of years ago, I was in Toronto attending a conference by the name of FITC. At the conference, I went and checked out a particular talk on web performance. Of course, I enjoyed it, but there was some really interesting material that was shared. Chris Zacharias, the actual speaker, was talking about his years at YouTube and how he worked on this project called Feather. This was a project where he was tasked to reduce the landing page weight of YouTube to something that was more manageable. He eventually, after the experience, wrote a blog post entitled Page Weight Matters. Over the years, this blog post would be referenced several times at conferences that I've attended by other speakers in the web performance space. When I went back and checked out the blog post again, just out of curiosity, I realized that it was turning 10 years old. So, to celebrate the actual blog post, its influence, I invited Chris Zacharias, CEO and founder of IMGIX, to recount the whole history about the project, about the good, the bad, and all things in between. I think you'll enjoy it. Folks, good afternoon. Good afternoon. We just had a little bit of a hiccup, so do not worry. We are back. Welcome. And this is a long-awaited episode that I've been wanting to record. One of these sort of fireside chatty kind of conversations that I've been meaning to have. And I'm really delighted to have our guest with us right now. I'm just going to get right into it. Chris, introduce yourself.
Hi, no, thanks, Henri. My name is Chris Zacharias. I'm the CEO and founder of IMGIX, which is the visual media platform for the internet. And we've known each other for a long time now, many years.
Yeah, we actually met in Toronto, where you're at right now, actually.
I'm in Toronto right now. It is much colder than where I came from.
I mean, the Bay is not always the warmest place, but it's certainly not as cold as Toronto right now. So that's all good. It's very interesting because I got in touch with you and we were talking about, performance-y stuff and life stuff. Yeah. But I reminded you that today is the 10th anniversary of a blog post that you wrote on December 21st, 2012.
Yeah.
It was a significant blog post, one that was sort of referenced quite often enough in the performance community and in talks across the globe. But we'll get into that in a hot minute. But for those who don't know you, I thought maybe you might want to kind of, talk about your little come up through the tech community.
Sure. I mean, I think to go, the blog post you're referencing is from my time at YouTube, which is where I did a lot of my early performance work. But prior to that, I kind of grew up wanting to be an animator. I saw Toy Story when I was a kid, and then I saw Jurassic Park, and that blew my mind. Played games like Myst, and I just made it my life's work to become a 3D artist. And the way, back, people may not realize this, but back in the day, like, it took a lot of horsepower to get some of these things that your phone now can do, no problem. And I had to make money to buy graphics cards. And so I learned how to program for the web because everybody wanted web work. They didn't want 3D work. And then eventually going through college, I kind of realized that, hey, maybe this web thing might be a good idea. It seems like everybody seems to want like an e-commerce website or a blog or whatever, back in the day. And so I started getting really into the web. And I went and worked at Xerox, building web products at Xerox right out of school. And then while I was at Xerox in, frigid upstate New York, I got the opportunity to join YouTube in 2007. So right at the time they had just gotten acquired by Google.
Wow. Okay. So you were at YouTube before they were acquired by Google?
No, I was after, slightly after. Okay. Right after. So I was there with the original team, but I was not like the beneficiary of all the windfalls and all that kind of stuff that people got there. But I was the beneficiary of the insane amount of traffic and the worldwide, appeal of the product. I mean, it was a rocket ship.
Oh, awesome to hear. I want to go back to you mentioned going to school. So you went to, if I'm not mistaken, you went to RIT. Is that correct?
I did, yeah, yeah. Right
And
across.
for those who don't know, it's Rochester Institute of Technology. Is that it?
Yep.
And I remember sort of like digging around, and
Yeah.
I'll bring this up again a little later, but they have like, they have the program you wanted to sort of, attend, like an animation program or just tech in general?
Well, what was interesting is they had a unique program, and they still have it. It's called the New Media program,
Mhm.
and the New Media program was like a hybrid major. And so at the time, it was actually I was the first, I think, official class. The class before us was sort of the test bed class.
Mhm.
And New Media, they wanted to create like a hybrid. At the time, it was information technology, graphic design, and print.
Mhm.
So you were exposed to in your first year, you kind of were in classes with people like print majors, graphic designers, and information technology specialists.
Mhm.
And I went the information technology track, but you share the classes for the first year, and the second and third year you specialize into your particular area, and then the fourth year you come back and you do a group project together, which is your sort of senior thesis. And
Mhm.
it was pretty much the perfect amalgamation of like everything that I've experienced since entering the working world. And so in that major, because it was so early at the time, I got to kind of choose my own adventure, and so I kind of built in film. I got approval to build in film and computer game development. So I spent a lot of time in 3D. So it was like the perfect opportunity for me to build game engines, animate and rig 3D models, like learn about, complex texture mapping pipelines. Like it was a really great experience, but it was all pretty surface level. Most of the people who wanted to go even deeper would go into graduate school in that specific discipline if they
Okay.
wanted to. So
Oh, okay.
yeah.
And no, good to know because, again, I might bring this up a little later, but I do realize that there was some, I think, significant work, if not some people of significance that were
Oh yeah.
around RIT, and who
Oh
had
yeah.
very much at least some influence on image products later on, I think, in history. So we'll touch on
Well,
that a little later.
not
Um,
just image project products, but like JavaScript libraries. jQuery came out of RIT, and
Wait,
then yeah,
he went to Mr. Rizik went to RIT?
I believe that's true. You can look it up. I'm pretty sure he was a computer science house guy.
Oh, you might be right. I think I'm good at this now.
And then also Vimeo started out of there. Jacob Lodwick also started. It was at RIT.
No way.
Yeah,
This is crazy. And it's funny because I've seen RIT recruit at FITC where we met.
yeah, all the
And
time.
and I was like, oh, RIT's here. Okay, cool. No
Yeah,
way. John Resig went to RIT.
I hope I'm right about that, but I'm pretty sure.
You
Yeah,
could be right. I have to double check, but either way, that's still awesome. Wow. Okay. And Vimeo came out of RIT as well, you said.
yeah, yeah. Jake is definitely is a friend, and we went through the same program together.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Now, I know I'm forgetting this gentleman's name, but I know I might as well bring it up right now. So I know that Steve Sasson, the inventor of the digital camera, uh,
Hmm.
talked about someone who's at RIT, maybe to this present day, like a teacher who
Yeah.
he talked about how JPEG. This is like way back in the 70s or 70s, yeah, maybe. Uh, but anyways, when he was working on digital camera, he said JPEG was going to be the future, and
Yeah.
because of like discrete cosine, discrete,
Yeah. DCTs. Yeah.
yeah, exactly, discrete cosine transfer. Is that what it's
Yeah.
called? And
Trans- yeah.
that gentleman, I think, was at RIT, and I was just like, kind of like,
Yeah.
okay, what's going on here? Like, where's the magic? It's like apparently it's at RIT.
Well, actually, they renamed the program that I came from the Magic program. Ironically,
No
yeah,
way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the sort of the history there, I mean, people don't know this, but Rochester was like effectively built by photography. Kodak, and I should say photography and xerography. So Kodak was founded there, Xerox was founded there, and that kind of built that whole city. Obviously, those are sort of, sort of not the shining stars that they once were. If I'm being charitable, but in the 50s through the 90s, they were massive contributors to the local area, in particular funding so many programs at schools like RIT, specifically RIT, because RIT was very heavily recruited out of by Kodak and Xerox. And so a lot of the programs that they funded were the exact programs that would be related to photography and visual media processing and everything you can imagine under the sun. Chemical sciences related to photography, like, yeah.
That's awesome. Like my mind's blown right now. I knew about Kodak. I didn't know about Xerox though. But yes, like you mentioned in terms of like the chemistry of photography is significant, and I remember reading that in a Polaroid story actually, which is another great story. But anyhow, I don't want to just kind of like lose my mind around that again. But would you say even that, well, I guess maybe not immediately, but do you think there was a little bit of influence out of what you saw there that would sort of shape your life later on professionally?
Oh my God, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, probably the best thing about it was, and to this day, I don't think RIT values this enough, but the new media program, and in particular the new media lab, which is where everybody just hung out all the time, was the direct parallel to, early stage startup life, like especially West Coast style startup life. I mean, if you've ever been to Rochester, New York, it is frigid for like 8 months out of the year. And it's, the floodplains of Lake Ontario. So it's just flat, dark, cold. So to have like a wonderfully creative little cave to hide in all winter and just hang out with your friends was just and just be productive and do anything possible to not go outside. It's a very powerful force. And like, people who came out of that program have just done incredible things. And they're just behind the scenes for the most part. And so I've always wanted to replicate that environment as much as possible. And so like, whenever I'm not speaking ill of Xerox. Xerox is a big company, but it wasn't quite that environment. And so when I saw the opportunity, when I interviewed at YouTube and I got to see kind of what that environment was like, I was immediately like, it was like a magnetic attraction. I just had to, like, I picked up and moved to California within 3 weeks. And I in fact forgot to tell my girlfriend I was moving, which was probably not the best look at the time. I was just like so excited. I mean, I told her kind of in arrears. I was like, oh, by the way, in 3 weeks, I'm leaving.
Oh yeah, you called her from the airport?
No, it wasn't that bad, but it was definitely, yeah. I was very excited that there was a place like that existed, that mapped to where I came from out of the new media lab.
That's awesome. That's a great story. So let's talk about let's get into the YouTube bit then. So you got recruited first of all from RIT to Xerox.
Yes.
And you spent how long at Xerox?
Oh man, I want to say, okay, so probably about 2 to 3 years, somewhere around there.
Okay.
And that was a wonderful experience. It's just it was much more corporate, much more, 9 to 5. Did a lot of really cool work there around printer drivers, which does not sound that interesting, but it is a hard problem to solve. And it was a big, they gave me a lot of responsibility to work on that. And it was super fun. I mean, from a, kind of getting into the weeds idea, the people who I could never explain to my family what exactly I was working on because it was just too obtuse. So yeah. And then, yeah.
No, go ahead, please.
And then I saw the, I believe it's called like the Two Kings video, which is the YouTube video where Chad and Steve are outside the TGI Fridays. It's so ironic because, like I was there when Adobe acquired Macromedia and announced Flash Video at FITC back in like 2002 or 2003.
Okay.
And I remember thinking to myself, like, who's going to use this video stuff? And then of course, later on, I see this video of Chad and Steve from YouTube on the internet, video on the internet, talking about how they just sold to Google for $1.6 billion, right? And they were just deliriously happy. And I was like, oh man, I just wish I could find something like that to work on. I had no idea I would actually end up there. But I applied to Google, and at Xerox, I was like, I'll see if I can go to the West Coast. I've always wanted to go to San Francisco.
Yeah.
I'll apply to Google, and Google brought me out. I interviewed. Apparently, I made it really far in the process, but I didn't get the job, which is pretty common. So for people out there, whoever applying to a place like Google, just try again.
Yeah.
A couple of weeks later, I just pinged my recruiter and said, hey, I've added a few more things to my resume. I just want to give you an update. And he's immediately like, hey, I got this new thing, this new opportunity, but I can't really tell you too much about it. It's still kind of in the works, but we'd love to get you out here in like 4 weeks and tell you about it. And it turned out to be YouTube. Yeah.
So you went direct to YouTube, didn't get in, even though you got far in the process, and then
I went to Google. It was Google.
Google. I'm sorry. Okay, got it. YouTube, Google. All right, it's all synonymous to me right now.
So. I know.
Okay, got it. So now YouTube comes calling through a recruiter, and that's
Google. Yeah,
that's when you got in.
Yep.
Cool. And so you're at YouTube now, and what's the environment like?
I mean, it was intense because I mean, obviously they were having incredible growth, like unimaginable growth. And it was a little bit, I mean, they did their best to kind of onboard me, but it was like pretty just like, go sit next to this person, figure out what they're doing, like just go, or, the people, it's so fascinating in hindsight because like the people I was sitting next to now, like, at the time, now they all run like these major organizations, like they're, just people I had no idea how good they were at the time because they were just the person who sat next to me and sometimes I got lunch with, and I had no idea that they were like they were going to go on to become like some of the top sales leaders in the world and like, stuff like that. And so everybody, I guess what I'm saying is a very horizontal, environment. So everybody just kind of was friends with everybody and everybody was just hustling on whatever part of the company that they needed to hustle on. And some people were doing like really incredible, like crazy, I didn't understand until many years later, like on the legal side, handling some of the legal issues and the rights management issues and all this other stuff that were just so orthogonal to what I was doing. But yeah, and I was part of the user experience team. So the web development team, there was only one web developer. There was one full-time web developer for me, and then one person who was a project manager who was moonlighting as a web developer, like just to kind of help. Yeah.
So you were there at the just absolute beginning, literally.
No, I mean the beginning was like 2005.
Okay.
And so I was in 2007, and so it wasn't like they had a website, they had a presence, it was blowing up. But now they were in a position where they were building out like there was a few user experience people before, and now they're building it out into like, now we've got to take this seriously. Now that we have the funding from Google, the money from behind the backing from Google, we have to build out like a real user experience team and really kind of make this the dominant player in the market.
So, and when I say you were there at the beginning, I meant, were you there at the start, post Google acquisition?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, a few months after Google acquired them is when my start date was.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. So,
yeah.
Implied anyways.
So it was about, I think it was about 100 people, maybe 75 to 100 people at the time.
Wow.
And yeah, I mean, the web development side, it was very quickly, there's like 3 of us. So it was like my boss, and then shortly after I got hired, we hired my friend Mime, and like the 3 of us, I believe, were the first sort of core team, and then we continued to grow that team over the next year or two.
Incredible. Wow. So you're at Google now, and you said earlier, YouTube is experiencing just unimaginable growth. People tapped in and they're just trying to watch videos all day. And so at the time, was YouTube showing videos via Flash?
Yes, it was all Flash. Yeah.
Okay.
So we hired one of the best Flash developers. I mean, I believe he's spoken at FITC. I could be wrong, but uh, yeah, we hired one of the top Flash developers, the creator of Swift Object, and he came in and took over the player, and then they built out a team, got the player going on the Flash side. I mean, it was originally developed. The original one was actually developed by one of the earliest engineers at YouTube, and that code was like, was very much built just to serve the single purpose of serving video. And so obviously we brought in people to start threading in some of the other functionality like comments and, annotations and ads and all that.
Wow.
Yeah.
And we're in 2022. It's it's
Shocking.
wild to hear that, and you forget that YouTube once ran on Flash.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, wow, Flash, you cannot forget Flash, and
No.
it was in fact, for those who have their sort of gripes with it, but it was a bit of like an entry point for a lot of people in web industry.
Oh yeah.
In general. So Flash certainly had its place in time. And there's some essays about that. However, moving forward, so you've been there a couple of years now, and we get to this moment one day where you mentioned in your blog post that I guess your boss came in and was like, "What?"
Oh, I mean, I guess. Well, there's a couple of things intersecting projects. So I had the unique opportunity to kind of work on every part of the site for the most part. Over various different projects and things like that, and we all just kind of piled on to whatever needed to get done, and then eventually people specialized into the search page or the watch page or the home page. I really liked the 20% time at Google. If you don't know what 20% time is, you're supposed to spend about 20% of your time working on something that's not your job, something you're interested in that could benefit the company.
And this was happening even back then.
Oh yeah. It was like a institutionalized value in the company. And so when I was snowboarding with one of the directors of YouTube, one of the engineering directors, and we were talking about how the HTML5 tag or the HTML5 specification was being written right at that moment in time with I think it was Nathan Hickson and somebody else, Ian something, I think, so long ago. We were talking about how there's going to be a video element, and so we started talking about like how could we actually use the video element, and how could we actually like help write the spec, or at least help make it useful to us and what we needed to accomplish. And the first thing, the idea that came out of that was sort of like, well, we should probably build a player and just see what's even possible, right? So I set to work doing that, and that was actually like sort of became an official project. So building an HTML5 video player as a potential replacement to the Flash player is sort of the thing that kind of kicked off my web performance. I mean, not that I wasn't already fascinated by web performance. I mean, being able to like research through Google all the different web performance angles that Google was exploring, especially with the search engine, was really exciting. And then that was my first like sort of beefy project where I could really dig in and say like, oh, okay, like let's see how fast we can get the video stream to load if we don't have to load or bootstrap Flash into the equation. And so that got to be really, really cool. And so as I was going through that project, it kind of got me obsessed with like how small can we get this page. And one day, I was looking for a reason to work on stuff like that, but I didn't have a good reason to work on stuff like that per se, until one of the earliest engineers, Mike Solomon, was just like, he was sort of the architectural titan of YouTube. And so everybody would go to him for these architectural tech talks. And one time he just kind of like openly demonstrated frustration of how heavy the web page had gotten, because we'd always kept it nice and light, but because of the various ad products and because of throwing more related videos on and all that, it hit balloon to about 2 megs, like 1.5, 2 megs. And he brought up I forgot the name of it was like some German developer had created a version of Quake in like under 100 kilobytes by using some like mega compression techniques.
Yeah.
And Mike was just saying, like, how come he can, this person can deliver a Quake clone in under 100 kilobytes and we can't even get our webpage under a megabyte.
Yeah.
And that really just kind of, it was partially because of like sort of a need to impress Mike Solomon.
Yeah.
I needed to go and just show him, as sort of prove my mettle kind of a thing. I
like
made that.
Shots fired. Shots fired.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's also, it's a shot across the bow of the web development team, right? Because like we're technically the last line of defense on page weight. We can't necessarily say no to things, but we can say like, hey, this is too heavy and push back.
Yeah.
So yeah, that led me down this path of what ultimately became what we called Project Feather, which was the hyper lightweight version of YouTube.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So Project Feather is officially established, and this becomes not so much the 20%, but now this is an official work assignment.
Ooh, not necessarily, because it became kind of more of a secret project, to be honest.
Oh, okay.
At the time, and rightfully so, Google was kind of like coming in, and a lot more Google engineers were coming in, and there was a direction that they wanted to go in, and this direction was not necessarily in line with that. So I was definitely operating under sort of the old guard's watchful eye, and they were the ones kind of keeping me. They kept motivating me to go forward, but they were keeping it kind of quiet because they didn't want it to get, kind of killed by product management. So it was just sort of my project I did on the bus to and from San Bruno.
Right.
And just trying to get it smaller and smaller, and just keep, trying to get the page weight down. And because I had the freedom to kind of, because this was separate from the main watch page, I had the freedom to cut things out. So I was able to, limit the amount of comments or make the comments lazy load. I could reduce the number of related videos, and there, make changes that you otherwise probably could not make on the watch page without having significant impact to traffic patterns and whatnot.
So just one or two steps back, with the idea that there was someone who was quietly letting you work on this project, this Feather project, which was almost like a secret project, as you mentioned. Would you say then that, and this is early on, but would you say that there was an immediate buy-in / there was a performance culture hurdle?
Was there a performance called? Performance was of the utmost. It was everybody, YouTube and Google, and as they intermixed, everybody was very performance focused. The question was, what was the outcome that they were trying to achieve? So, if performance around business fundamentals, which at the time was very, very important, because at the time YouTube was like hemorrhaging money, and they needed to flip that around. Like there were trade-offs, obviously, so it couldn't be pure performance. And that's something that I always caution people about, is like, when I talk about doing these like high performance websites or doing a super lightweight version, you have to understand that you're saying no to a bunch of other concerns. And we could not necessarily do that as a company. That's why it was a little bit more of a side project and a little bit more of a secret project, because I was saying no to ads. I was saying no to huge lists of related videos. I was saying no to comments, and just to get the performance to perform. And the way that the engineers saw it is, they saw this as like a baseline that they could use as sort of leverage when other people would bring, technology into the watch page, and they would just weigh the watch page way down. They could say, well, hey, the watch page could be this small. Like here's an example of the watch page running that's this small. So maybe you should go back and figure out how to make your stuff smaller so we can look more like that page than the page we have currently.
Okay. Because the way you described it seemed like, I felt someone was sort of like shielding you from the possible backlash.
That did kind of happen. And I mean, it was the right. I mean, it was sort of my siren song there, not because of other than just it was time for me to move on. So I mean, there was a lot of things they were doing to make the site scale bigger
Mhm.
so that it could go more places. And it wasn't necessarily front end stuff. It was all back end stuff.
Mhm.
And so it was going to change the shape and nature of YouTube at the time.
Mhm.
And yeah, people were shielding me because they wanted to see what was possible.
Mhm.
But they knew that nobody thought it was actually going to become something that would stick around for quite a while.
Wow.
Everybody thought it was going to be like, I would do this work, prove the point that we could get it under 100 kilobytes, get the web page under 100 kilobytes, and then we would do a tech talk about it, and that would basically be, hey, this is what we found,
Mhm.
right? What really shocked us is when we put it into production, which is something that's pretty fascinating when you work at a place like YouTube, is that you put something into production with, a 0.5% of traffic, and you're hitting like tens of millions of people immediately.
Right.
Very overwhelming. So, we did that, and then weird things started to happen that we couldn't explain. And that's where it kind of found its legs.
Yeah. So for those who may have missed or never read the blog post, and I'll eventually post it in the notes and whatnot.
Sure.
Um, the key was to get the landing page that your boss felt was a little too heavy
Yeah.
down first.
Yeah.
And I remember you had managed to get it down to 250 at one point,
Yeah.
and then you were like, I got to do better than this, and you eventually were able to get it down to sub 100, and I believe it was like 98 kilobytes.
Yes. 98
Awesome.
kilobytes, about 14 requests total. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So now, as you said, it's down to sub 100, 14 requests, and you go live, and what happens?
Where, obviously I was very excited to see, I was expecting to see our latency numbers really improve,
Mhm.
or at least, you're talking about 0.5%, like it could move the needle
Mhm.
quite a bit, or at least, we could cordon off that traffic and do like an A/B test and see okay, of a total of 1% of people, like half of them get shown Feather and the other half get shown a normal website.
Mhm.
Let's see what happens. And it was actually just showing up slower. It was
Mhm.
much slower. And it was really confusing because I'm like, how did I break the browser? I've done things that broke the browser for millions of people, and literally blue screened to death their computers
Yeah.
by accident. And I'm like, okay, something like that's happening. We did something wrong. Something really bad's happening. I used some sort of attribute selector I shouldn't have used. It's too new, and some browsers can't support something. And we could not find it. We could not find anything technically wrong with the web page. The web page was as vanilla as you could ever ask for.
Mhm.
It was straight HTML. It was single payload for the most part. The only resources loading in were images.
Yeah.
And so finally somebody said, let's look at the geography. Let's see where these requests are coming from. And they had become disproportionately distributed into places that had very high latency environments, exclusionary high latency, where you can't even load things.
Yeah.
So we just saw sub-Saharan Africa light up. We saw, rural regions of South America lighting up. We saw Siberia lighting up in ways we'd never seen before. And that was just fascinating. And so that started to explain what was going on. And what was going on is that people who could not previously reach YouTube, who had the means, they had cell phone technology. In fact, many of them had leapfrogged to cell phone technologies at the time. But the wires and the airwaves are just not fast enough. And
Mhm.
so loading that 2 megabyte, that 1.5, 2 megabyte YouTube watch page would take 20 minutes for them. They would just never do it.
Yeah.
But now it would take 2 minutes, which is an absurd amount of time as we're used to, on our modern connections. But, someone trying to learn, trying to study something, 2 minutes is a reasonable amount of time to wait.
Yeah.
And they were suddenly able to do that.
Incredible. And I still remember the day I read the blog post for the first time, and I was like, wow. And you just start to think of all the situations around the conversations, especially around emerging markets, and what they were going through. And you don't often get to have that conversation with anyone from the emerging markets, right? You're like,
Yeah.
wonder what it's like. But through your work and everything you had done to sort of get the page down to sub 100 kilobytes, now you had all these emerging markets with who basically had hope
Yeah.
to see content, because
Yeah.
they'd heard of YouTube, and they just never were able to partake in the sort of joy and enjoyment that others in G7 countries, I like to say,
Yeah,
were likely experiencing.
exactly. Yeah. And I mean, we're not even talking about seeing the video. Like we're just trying to get the page to load. Like the video would start after 20 minutes,
Right.
and then on there, it's probably
Yeah.
going to buffer. And, I mean, Google is very good at serving really low bitrate videos for people on like really low bandwidth connections. But problem was getting to that to begin with. And a lot
Mhm.
of these places, it's like we're loading in ads, we're loading in these giant images, like, well, arguably giant images. They're pretty compressed, but
Mhm.
um, you know, we should have been using like, LKIP kind of images instead of real images for those people, just because
Mhm.
the bandwidth was so tiny.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. And you mentioned something earlier that caught my attention. Oh, so you were talking about like breaking browsers, and you were
yeah,
interested in what's going on because I guess you joined Google in what year? Or you
2007.
2007,
Yeah,
which means, if I'm not mistaken, Chrome did not exist yet.
Chrome was.
I think Chrome launched in 2008 or
It
nine.
might have. I mean, I think we had it internally. I don't know. Some of the stuff is like tough for me to like time
Yeah.
box because
Mhm.
we had the HTC smartphone, the first Android devices like a year in advance, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so
But at the very least, Chrome, if it was there, it had to be in its earliest stages, and
yeah,
which means it was probably running off WebKit,
yeah,
if I'm
yeah,
not
yeah,
mistaken. So
yeah.
I'm just kind of doing the math in my head here. So now you've made this sort of discovery,
Mhm.
and I guess you're understanding and processing what's going on. Latency, low power devices potentially, and
Yeah.
just like page weight in general. What are you thinking about at that time? Like, have you completely changed perspective in that moment in terms of page weight and performance even?
Well, I mean, I think the thing that really kind of shook me is that like it's not even a conversation if it can't load. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like and so much of the world is still kind of in the dark in that sense.
Hmm.
And it's getting better. It's gotten a lot better in the last 10, 12 years.
Hmm.
But like it's one thing to like want to be able to optimize, but if you can't even get the person to see it to begin with, you're in trouble, right? And far too often, I think the tools that we use and things like that just kind of layer additional weight into everything we're doing, and like if we don't take inventory of that, we can kind of fall behind, and we don't know who's, it's like proving a negative kind of thing. Like you don't know who's not looking at your stuff, and
Wow.
and so that was an interesting discovery there.
Nice, nice, nice. So now, and I know we don't have a ton of time, but I do want to get into the point where you go from there. And I'm assuming you went from YouTube and you went right into founding IMGIX.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, well, not. I wouldn't say I went directly into it. I never intended to start a company.
Oh.
I loved that intersection of computer graphics and the internet, which
Mhm.
YouTube played in, which I played in college.
Mhm.
Um, and so I just started doing freelance work for people. And one of the problems that just kept coming up was high resolution images coming from disparate sources, from photographers or from advertisers, and then people needing to format them and deliver them on their web page. Probably the most fun example is The Lonely Island, the comedy trio that Andy Samberg, Akiva
Okay.
Schaffer, and Norma Tacconi started, the Saturday Night Live folks. I went and worked for them for a bit, and one of the biggest challenges that we had was they kept wanting to put photos up on their Facebook, on their Instagram, and those photos were coming from Universal Music Group, and they were like 200 megabyte photos, like TIFF files,
Wow.
uncompressed, meant to be printed out and put on a billboard in Los Angeles to herald their new album or whatever. And it was just wasting so much of my time sitting there manually resizing and cropping in Photoshop.
Yeah.
And as many Photoshop actions as I could build, I could not get ahead of it. It was just too much work. And then eventually I just started building server technology to do it. And that's kind of where I started using that technology all over with all my clients at the time. We had something sort of similar. It was all video focused at YouTube. And that was like something that I kept wanting to reach for. Even though it wasn't the perfect tool at YouTube for what I wanted to do with these images, it was like something, and I couldn't find anything on the market. So I just started building one. And then eventually what happened was people started asking if they could use it for their own projects. Like, it was a service. It was like a
Yep.
web service that I built. And then some people said, "Hey, you should make this into like a business, and you should charge me money," is what people started saying.
Yes,
And
yes.
which is a good sign. And so then I started thinking about it more seriously as a business, and went through the Y Combinator program with it, which was a big validating step for me, like as a reluctant founder of a company at the time. And then that kind of gave me the validation I needed to say, like, hey, this could be a real thing.
Amazing, amazing. And at the time, and this is sort of like an aside, were there many or any other? Well, there must have been some
Yeah.
companies in that space doing what you were trying to start up.
Yeah, I mean, so there's definitely competitors, and they're still out there. We all kind of started at the same time, though. It seemed like, I mean, you have to understand that in 2007 is when the iPhone came out. In 2010, the iPad came out, and when most Android devices really started kind of hitting the mainstream. Before that, we kind of lived in this utopia of everybody had the same browser dimensions. So you always knew exactly what 3 sizes of images you needed.
Yeah.
On your website. And then the second, the iPhone doubled those numbers of images, the iPad tripled them, and then the HTC devices, the early HTC devices, and then all the Android devices that followed just multiplied the complexity so much that it makes sense that multiple companies started at about the same time.
Wow.
We were all trying to solve the same problem. We're trying to save time for people downstream,
Yeah. That's incredible, because I do remember the iPhone launch, and from time to time I actually go watch the video, and there's a part where Steve Jobs is demoing the iPhone, and I think he's loading up the New York Times, and he actually says, like, it's a little slow because of all the images. I'll never forget that quote.
Wow, I have to go rewatch that. I didn't know that.
Oh yeah. He says it like he's hunched over. He's like, yeah, it's a little slow because of the images. And I'm like, bingo, bingo. Moscone Center, let's go.
Yeah.
No, it was pretty wild. But yeah, because I thought that at the time, having experienced Feather and everything that was taking place, like you said, in these emerging markets, you might have had that, that moment of clarity, like, oh my God, I need to start IMGIX, but hearing that, more, more realities in terms of images and having to process things. And, for anyone that doesn't know, Photoshop has had actions for a very long time. And I remember sort of like creating my little droplets and taking that folder right to it. And it's like, okay, go to work. And let me finish this other project.
Yeah, I mean, it was something that I just wanted that next level. It's sort of save for web, but on a save for web for a million images at the same time. Like, how do you do that? And like, how do you do that in a cost-effective way? Because you don't want your computer lighting on fire, right? Like, So I really just built it for something I wanted as a web developer. I just wanted something that would do this.
Yeah, and then someone's like, I'll pay you for it. And you're like, hey, there might be a business here.
I was still kind of like, well, how much? Because I don't know. Like, at the time,
do I tell them it's a
lot of work to start a company. It's a lot of work to start a company. So it's like,
I could imagine. And before we wrap up, I wanted to say, how, like, obviously, like you said, your idea was validated. But I tell people all the time, I don't think, we realized how important images were going to be to the web, like years later.
Oh yeah.
And for one, and for two, the other thing I want to ask you, like, how does it feel knowing that? And again, I'm very frank when I say this. I've sat in on many talks where your blog post gets referenced, and they're like, yeah, that blog post and I'm like, yeah, Project Feather, and like, how does it feel knowing that you've had, like, your experience that you've shared in a blog post has sort of like sort of like influenced a lot of talks, and certainly giving people like, clarity on what needs to be done when it comes to performance.
I mean, so with the first part of that question, or I would definitely say that it seemed obvious to me that like images would be or visual media, I should say, images, videos, 3D. Like, I mean, people are trying 3D stuff back in 1999, right? Like stuff that now is, kind of heralded what we do today, and some of this 3D stuff, the web 3D stuff. It just seemed natural, maybe a little bit shoehorned into the web specs at the time, but images were very rapidly becoming more than just descriptive. They were becoming emotions. People were using them to show reactions. People were using them, and people took it for granted because it became so easy to just use an image, to just serve a GIF to somebody, or create an avatar. So that definitely seemed like it seemed like images were going to be a big deal. I mean, it seems kind of quaint in retrospect, or obvious. Images have always been a big deal. The advent of the photographic camera is substantial.
Huge.
Huge. And once we got to digital cameras, it became just explosive. Now everywhere there's images, and now that the web exists, we now have the medium to deliver them on. So it didn't seem like it was that far of a stretch to think that they were going to be a big deal. And in fact, I think most of the web is reduced down now to like images, videos, and API calls. Like everything else, all the UI and stuff is basically loaded in once or installed, and then everything transiting the wires is constantly just images and videos and API calls. In terms of like the blog post itself, like I never intended it to go anywhere outside of my friend group, to be honest. Like, it was just like sort of, it was this time of year. I was home, I was visiting family, and I was kind of, it was middle of the week, so people were working, and I just wanted to sit down and write something. I wanted to get something out of my head, and so I wrote this, and had no idea that it would actually have any impact. And then it kind of like went to the top of Y Combinator, Hacker News for like 2 days straight, and I was kind of panicking because I'm like, I've never had anything go viral.
That's so funny.
I don't like being the center of attention in that situation, like, or at least at the time. Like once the number started ticking up, I'm like, oh no, like what did I say? Did I say everything correctly? Did I say anything that's gonna get me in trouble?
Exactly. They're gonna come find me.
Yeah. Did I just like spill any secrets that I wasn't supposed to spill? I don't know.
Yeah. Oh no, and again, it was incredible because I think there are so many conversations that have emerged from that very moment where you sort of hit enter. Because again, we could talk about the emerging markets and a problem that is kind of like not solved. 10 years later, we can talk about page weight, a problem that we know is not solved 10 years later. We could talk about devices and the fact that certain parts of the world, they are exclusively on handheld. They discovered the web on mobile, and this is all they'll ever know. You know what I mean? Like they're not going to drop everything and pick up a desktop now. So I think it's there's a lot to sort of unpack there, and even 10 years later, you can still create an argument as to why like a lot of this has not been solved, and that's why it's still impactful to this day. I would do and I'll end it shortly. It's the Google team, the next billion users, the NBU team.
I haven't heard of this.
Oh man, so they have a team called NBU, Next Billion Users, where they just address all the needs of the next user, because they are coming in on mobile, and they are quite often enough in these remote areas. Like, how do you solve the access question? Because access leads to like everything else, education, information, whatever it may be. And, I think the idea of that team to me is fascinating. And it's something that I wish they were on Twitter, because I know, I want updates, and stuff like that. So it's really important, I think, that this conversation is had, because again, before, I think it was last week or the week before, we were talking about, current state of development right now. And
Yeah.
I think it's amazing what we've been able to do, and all the frameworks, but the data, courtesy of Chrome Experience Report, User Experience Report, and other areas, we see that there's a lot of page weight issues to this day.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You
Yeah, I
know,
mean, every time it seems like, and it feels a little bit like running up a sand dune, because I feel like every time we make a stride forward and network performance, we kind of kill it by layering in a significant amount of additional bloat. And I think one of the things that I want more engineers to think about is sort of like, are these tools, are these frameworks making me more effective, or are they making me more comfortable? Because I don't think being comfortable is necessary. I think being effective is necessary. And
absolutely.
so like the choosing, like reaching for the right tools and making sure those tools are doing what you need to be effective and to deliver your message or whatever website you're trying to deliver to as many people as possible is the critical aspect. Like developer comfort is a nice to have, but it should not be dictating like how these things are built or how we build the future of the web.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also something I found interesting is that, well, I mean, I shouldn't be surprised, but even in the early days of YouTube, you're being challenged with a sort of like a bombardment of ads, right, and advertising, and again, conversations that are still present to this day. Like,
oh yeah,
nothing's been solved there, it seems.
and it's going to get more complicated now because we have people, for better or for worse or for whatever direction it takes, like Apple has weighed in on that, and Facebook's weighing in on that, and everyone's weighing in on like what the future of advertising is going to be like, and what's blocked and what's allowed, and it's going to be complicated, and there's going to be performance ramifications.
And that's it. And for all the discussions around GDPR in Europe and stuff,
oh yeah,
that user experience is not nailed yet.
Right.
So it's
oh certainly.
It's yeah, like cookie consent stuff left and right. It's like, woof, the web is not what it used to be, that's for sure. I mean, since we do have a few more minutes, like, do you have any sort of like, wild stories or, again, discoveries that you've made, during your time, say at IMGIX, that again may have had impact or were like, very enlightening, like they were with Project Feather?
Let's see here. I mean, in terms of like from IMGIX specifically, or more YouTube stories, like
I mean, IMGIX or YouTube, whichever, because it was obviously the YouTube one is significant, but maybe there's some additional discoveries are made during your IMGIX years or current IMGIX.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things is like one of the most we've definitely had we've had people leverage our technology in ways we'd never imagined. So like nesting image renders on top of image renders on top of image renders to get really incredible things built, like very complicated dynamic imaging that it's a problem we need to solve for. But the way that they found a way to do it with us has been like one of the most interesting things, and something that continues to this day. Like, is something I think about all the time. Big companies. I don't want to name who, but like big companies doing incredible design work by like basically patching together stuff that we built that was never intended to do what they're trying to make it do. And like that is the most exciting thing, is when you see somebody like using your technology to do something that you never imagined. It's far beyond what you ever intended it to do. That becomes really exciting. And then it leads me, personally, it leads me to like be like, okay, well, how do we innovate and make that actually not just something that's like a little bit scary, because we're like looking at like how deep are they going to go, or how much recursion are they going to put into this, into something like, hey, that could be a product, or that could be an idea, that could be something that could make things much more powerful for these people.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, there haven't been that as many surprises. I mean, when you run an internet service as opposed to a consumer, website, it's quite a bit different. I mean, no one sent me death threats at IMGIX yet. And YouTube is like every couple of weeks, it seemed like.
Oh, no way.
Oh yeah.
No way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
One of the projects I had is I changed the header bar for 5% of our user base from a silver to a red. And that triggered like a watershed of death threats. Yeah.
what am I hearing right now?
I know. I mean, when you have, billion people or however many people looking at your stuff, like
I,
somebody's going to get angry.
wow, that's
Yeah.
incredible. I mean, I'll be very frank. I'm a massive fan of YouTube. I think, I don't know if it's considered social media. I sure don't.
Mhm.
I think they have been, and you talked earlier about, the early days and, the legal teams and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I could imagine how busy they were then and potentially are now to this day. I don't know how they've made the changes, but, I love YouTube in that I'm able to sort of like find content that I know I would never have been able to watch because someone was nice enough to take like the beta or the VHS tape and just upload it
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
watch historic like you know documentaries and stuff that can never make it to Netflix. And I pay for YouTube Premium. I'm happy to say it. I'll say it all the time.
Nice.
It's such a great product. Just to be able to, like, I'm traveling this weekend,
Yeah.
making sure I'm downloading some content so I can just watch it on offline.
Yep. Yeah.
um
Yeah. I
so
mean, and frankly, credit goes to all the people. Like, I mean, I was there for a brief window into where,
Mhm.
it's been 10 years since I've been there. And the team has just continued to produce
Yeah.
over and over and over again. Like, they made that product scale, and then they made the business scale. And it's
Mhm.
incredibly impressive.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Here's a cool question. This is completely like major aside, and we're talking about the importance of images, and like you said, everything's pretty much like um, you know, image content, whether it be video or stills. Um, are you having any issues with the current uh, possibilities of like manipulation now? Because I know that this is just came up recently. I was talking to someone, and the way you can manipulate video. There's AI going on.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
you
You
know,
mean synthetic imagery?
pardon me.
I mean, like synthetic imagery, like
I mean, so much like I'm thinking of the term here where deep fakes. That's it.
yeah, 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 yeah.
And have you had like any concerns with that, and and some of that content sort of like flowing through your channels?
I mean, certainly. I mean, we don't have the ability to, at the moment, we certainly don't have the ability to directly combat that
Hmm.
in terms of like detecting it.
Hmm.
If somebody detects it on their website, we can certainly help them get it down or get it
Hmm.
blocked, like,
Hmm.
or if it's going through their channels or whatever. There's this concept of attribution
Hmm.
that would be an exciting direction to go in. I was kind of hoping to see more development on like blockchain and distributed ledger kind of stuff
Hmm.
for rights management and attribution. Haven't seen much in that lately
Hmm.
or at all. And I think that's the way you're going to have to solve that problem, is to be able to detect if something looks like it's a derivative of something else, and then be able to track that back to the original creator. The deep fakes are going to just get better and better, though. The image synthesis stuff has gotten incredible, obviously,
Yeah.
and it's just going to be really, really hard to do that through detection.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
computers are getting good enough to be able to avoid detection. So even humans are going to, I mean, obviously, if you can deep fake somebody, that means you've already beat humans.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so
100%. I mean,
yeah,
so no, I think it's a very interesting challenge right now, and because everything has to be sort of like double and triple checked now,
yeah,
and like you said, in terms of like provenance, people want to know like which was the original file, was
yeah.
it spoofed at all? And I know the JPEG organization are working on something around this space, and
Mhm.
I'm hoping to get them to I mean, discuss it one day. I don't know, but
Yeah,
they're somewhere in like Switzerland, you know,
yeah.
somewhere
It's
in
a,
the so somewhere in the mountains,
Yeah.
like working on this stuff. So, but yeah, it's a very interesting space. Um, Man, dude, I want to thank you for all this time.
Oh,
It's
thank you. I appreciate.
it's been an hour, but I love the insights. I love the insights. I love the insights. I love the history, and getting to hear, like, even the RIT stuff. There's some stuff I had like absolutely no idea, you know. And I hope that more of this kind of content gets to flow out, because I really want to make sure that people who had sort of, like, I think, significant input in the space get to be seen. Because I'll tell you right now, I remember when I first announced our conversation, someone pinged me. They're like, I never knew who it was. They
Oh
were
wow.
they're excited about this whole thing. And I'm like,
Nice.
yeah, dude, like, you used to come up to Toronto. And I remember I was sat in on the stocks. I'm like, wow, this is amazing.
Nice.
So, but yeah, man, I definitely want to thank you for your time,
Thank
and
you. I really appreciate it. This has been a blast. A walk
it,
down memory lane for sure.
oh, dude, it was such an opportunity. And I was like, oh, and it was in my calendar. And the fact that you're in Toronto too, which is like super amazing. So,
Yeah.
and we're like literally about 2 kilometers apart right now.
Right on. All
It's,
right.
it's a little crazy. All right. Well, folks, we are going to, well, I'm going to chop this up. I'm going to clean it up, make sure you can rewatch it. I'm going to chop it up, make a little podcast out of it as well. So you could, get that in your favorite podcatcher. I don't know what the language is there. Uh, I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Again, super insightful conversation. Mr. Zacharias or Zacharias?
Zacharias. Yeah.
Zacharias. All right. And man, it was a pleasure to have you on. And let's keep the conversation flowing. Let's stay in touch for sure.
Yeah. Absolutely. For
And,
sure.
and
Great to
chat
be
some
here.
more. Yeah, man. Happy to have you. Folks, thank you very much. Thanks for tuning in. That was Page Weight Matters. I'm going to include the link to the actual blog post again in the summary when I get this edited, so you can sort of read it. But now you have a bit of like the B-side, the director's cut of what really took place. And hopefully you enjoyed that all. So thank you very much. Chris, thank you again. Shout outs to IMGIX. And oh yeah, someone said, thank you for the great chat. Appreciate you. Thank you very much. And all right, dude, well, you know what? I'm going to end the broadcast and let's keep talking.
All right. Sounds good.
All right, cheers. Oh, look at that. IMGIX is in the building. All right. Hey.